Alex is here. That's fantastic. Josh, can you quickly run and get the door? Someone's at the door. Okay, we are, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we are live on YouTube, and it's wonderful to be with everybody over here. The class is getting recorded. We're going to learn it in person. We've got some people in person. We've got some people on Zoom, and we're going to have a fantastic time. We already are having a fantastic time. We're having the time of our lives. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akir niyah b'dvarei. Good morning, Alex. This is lesson 1 of captivating cases, and we're going to play from start with our PowerPoint. I'm going to share the PowerPoint. Got a lot of different mediums and things that I'm balancing, but I think juggling is always fun, and I'll juggle everything. So share Microsoft PowerPoint, and let's start over here. Captivating cases in rabbinic responsa. Listen in on the surprising practical questions your ancestors asked rabbis across Jewish history. And, oh, what happened over there? So, the topic today is dispatches of devotion, how responsa reveal unshakable Jewish loyalty. So let's talk about responsa, ladies and gentlemen, for a second. And we're going to analyze this genre of Jewish writings in today's class. We're going to analyze this genre of rabbinic writings during today's class. So let's imagine, just for the sake of a hypothetical, in fact, we don't have to imagine at all. We've got a real case. We're going to read today, to start the class and to explain what responsa is. Instead of me giving you a speech about what it is, let's read some responsa together. So we're going to start with something that was written by the Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet. Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet, one of the most important rabbis, ben Aderet, one of the most important rabbis in the late 13th or early 14th century. He lived in Spain. I'm on page 2 in our books. So firstly, it says the introduction, where it says the responsa literature is a treasured genre within the vast expanse of Jewish learning, providing insight into the process of rabbinic decision-making. Moreover, it also serves as a rich window into Jewish history. In this course, we will delve into many fascinating responsa. So let's start off. Let me tell you who the Rashba was. It's called the Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet. He lived from 1235 to 1310 in Barcelona in Spain. And that's what it says on the screen. But if you look at the side of our books over here on page 2, there's a little bio. Now, do you have the PDF? People at home, do you want me to try to toggle to the PDF, or do you think you can manage that part yourself?
I'm good.
We're fine. I'm fine.
Okay, fantastic. So it says over here about him on page 2, medieval halachist, Talmudist, and philosopher. Rashba was born in Barcelona, Spain, and was a student of Nachmanides and Rabbi Yonah of Gerona. He was known as El Rav de España, the rabbi of Spain. He's the one, because of his fame as a rabbinical authority. More than 3,000 of his responsa are extant. What that means, responsa is from the word response. His responses to questions. Have you ever called a rabbi and asked a question? You ever asked a rabbi a question? You might have asked a rabbi a question. Sometimes.
Social workers.
So this isn't it's very interesting. Usually the question that he was asked and the ones that he recorded are not so much the ones where people called him to ask, where they picked up the phone to call him. I didn't call him, right? I don't think he ever got a call. But he would receive letters, he would receive visits. People would come and ask him their biggest dilemmas, moral, ethical dilemmas. He was the rabbi of his time, the preeminent rabbi of his time that people would turn to from all over the world with the most difficult, ethical, legal, and practical dilemmas. And we're going to read one of the examples of the cases he was asked today. So when he was asked the really hard questions, he would write it down, his answer. And those documents are known as responsa because they are, in Hebrew, they are called sha'alot utshuvot, which means questions and answers. Sha'alot utshuvot. He writes the question and he writes the answer. And Shin Vav Taf, they call it in short, in short, they called shut. They're called shuts, shutim. In other words, Sha'alot utshuvot. Okay. More than 3,000 of his responsa are extant. That's remarkable if you think about it. Dealing with varied questions on halakha and religious philosophy addressed to him from Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, Germany, and Asia Minor. Among his numerous students were the Ritva and Rabbeinu Bechaya. Okay? So this is an example of a question he was asked. It can be found in our books on page 3. He wrote in Hebrew, we'll read it in an English translation. Reuven and Shimon. Now, whenever it says Reuven and Shimon, you know that that's not their real names.
Yeah.
That's like saying, what do they do in America? Kathy and Mark, or Jack and Joel. Very good. Jack and Joel. Very good. Jack and Joel. Reuven and Shimon were exempted from all taxes and levies by a royal decree bearing the king's seal. Sounds good, right? Reuven and Shimon. Dope, can you do me a favor, please, and go close all the doors between here and the house? Thank you so much. So Reuven and Shimon were exempted from taxes by royal decree, which is very nice for Reuven and Shimon. Could you imagine? It's wonderful. They must have done something good. The king appreciated him. Maybe they bribed him. Maybe they did something meritorious. I don't know what they did exactly. I don't know what they did. There was a king. They gained royal favor, and they were exempted from all taxes.
Yeah.
By a royal decree, by a royal decree bearing the king's seal. Later, the community incurred significant expenses for communal needs and protection. The community over here is talking about the Jewish community in which they lived. This included, so now you get an interesting thing. Now let's look at this question, because we are going to be looking, when we read responsa in this course, we're going to be looking at a lot of things, okay? We're going to be looking at a lot of things. The traditional way of reading responsa is to study halakha, to study Jewish law. You see how they dealt with Jewish law, what precedent did they do, what was the decision-making process that the rabbi went through to answer the questions. That's the very traditional way of learning it. There's a more modern way that people are looking back at responsa and saying, hold on a second, what historical information can we learn from this? All of a sudden, people are studying history. Jewish historians of Jewish history and general history are turning to rabbinic writings to see, 1 second, what can they tell us about what was actually happening at the time? What were the dynamics of the time? So one thing we've learned so far is that kings, probably in Spain at that time, gave exemptions to people, tax exemptions as favors. So this is we don't know the exact year this was written, but it's written during the time of the Rashba, which means late 1200s, early 1300s. So later, the community incurred significant expenses for communal needs and protection. The Jewish community had great expenses. Now, taxation happened in those days. This is very important information. One didn't pay tax individually to the government. The Jewish community was taxed, and the community as a whole paid the tax to the government in general. So let's see what happens now.
But that's how the Jews wanted it. They wanted the Kehillah.
So the Jews may have wanted it or not wanted it. It may have served the Jews. This was the arrangement between the king, the government, and the communities for hundreds of years. This included paying. Now the Jewish community has extra needs. These needs included paying bribes for safety during the Christian holiday and funding municipal improvements. Why do you think Jews would have to pay for safety during Christian holidays?
Because they don't have
basically extortion, like today's blackmail.
The mobs were riled up. The church would rile up the mobs, especially around Easter time. I was just in Israel on last Friday night, where there were parts of the old city of Jerusalem which were closed off by the army and by the police because they didn't want Jews walking through the Muslim neighborhood. In general, it's fine, but because it's Ramadan right now, and on Friday of Ramadan, even though during the day in general in Ramadan it's fine, but on Friday of Ramadan, just in case, they kept Jews out of the Muslim quarters. So the point, on Friday of Ramadan at the moment, I was in the Muslim quarter on Sunday without an escort. It's fine, you can walk through the Muslim quarter. Monday, I walked through the Muslim quarter by myself without a problem.
So why is Friday?
But because Friday is their Sunday, it's the day they all go to the mosques. It's their most. Well, hopefully they won't do jihad, but the mob could get riled up. So as a prevent. So the point is, around the holidays in Spain, on this time, Jews had to pay for extra protection. Today also, every Jewish community in America is paying more money for extra protection to get security guards and sort of things. A significant budget item in every Jewish community organization that wasn't there 10 years ago is security. Security has become a major line item in budgets. So this community in Spain, you have members of the community of Shimon and Levi, or Reuven and Shimon, and they are exempt from paying tax. Later, the community incurred significant expenses for communal needs and protection. This included paying bribes for safety during the Christian holiday and funding municipal improvements. They also spent heavily lobbying against the large badges that the king decreed all Jews must wear. They wanted, in Spain, all Jews had to wear large badges identifying them as Jews, successfully reducing the size of the badges by half and securing an exemption when wearing a cape. So there was some kind of, and so this is an interesting piece of history. Additionally, the king had decreed that Jewish creditors must forfeit their entire loan if two non-Jewish witnesses testified that they charged interest above the legal rate. So Jews were forced to lend on interest. This was one of the main Jewish businesses, because there were for whatever reason, they created the Jewish money lenders, and loans have to be on interest. But the king had capped the interest rate. Unfortunately, what happens when interest rates get capped is riskier loans are less likely to be made. So people would make loans, secret loans at a higher interest rate. But if you were caught, the king had made a rule: anyone who was caught would have to forfeit the entire principal of the loan and the interest. Could you imagine? So this was a big problem. Additionally, the king had decreed that Jewish creditors must forfeit the entire loan if two non-Jewish witnesses testify that they charged interest above the legal rate. The community successfully lobbied to change this, limiting the penalty to forfeiting only the excess interest. It was a biggie. The community contends that the king, so now comes along Reuven and Shimon. So the community has now got a lot of extra money because they've had to pay for all these bribes and all this lobbying work and all this. It's not all just bribes, but there's a lot of lobbying work and there's communal improvement. So the budget of the community has exploded. It's become very expensive to be Jewish in Spain. You've got to pay all these communal taxes. Meanwhile, two of the richest men in the community, Reuven and Shimon, are not paying any tax because they've been exempted by the king. So the community wants, now that they have all these new extra loans, which are not part of the regular, these new extra expenses that are not part of the regular budget, they want the rabbis to force Reuven and Shimon to pay into the extra communal expenses. But obviously Reuven and Shimon do not want to pay because they say where they're waiving their piece of paper from the king that says they don't have to pay taxes.
Sounds so much.
It sounds so modern, right? Thank you. So the community contends that the king's exemption applies only to taxes and levies, not to expenses incurred for their benefit and protection or municipal improvements. In other words, these are not the king's taxes. These are the Jewish community internal taxes for the benefit of the community, and they should have to pay it. Reuven and Shimon claim that their tax exemption should apply to these expenses as well. As evidence, they invoke the fact that they were never previously asked to contribute to similar expenses. They acknowledge deriving protection and benefit from the community's expenditure, but claim that this itself does not obligate them to contribute.
They're right.
Tell us, who is right? So this question comes in front of the Rashba. So they send the question off to Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet, the Rashba, and ask the Rashba, please, can you decide for us, give your verdict, should they have to pay these taxes or not? So, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, let's spend 2 minutes. Who thinks they should have to pay the taxes and why? Elaine?
The king's not part of the king.
The king's not part, and therefore,
See.
not to tax someone.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the
So you're
king-
saying the king's exemption only applies to general taxes and not these internal community taxes. That's what Elaine says. And does anyone, if you agree with Elaine, raise your hand. Okay, very good. Who thinks that they should not have to pay these taxes? Alex thinks they should not have to pay these taxes, and Gila does too, but Alex raised her. So why do you think, Alex?
Because the Jewish community is already agreed to the king's decree. They already agreed to this. So that means they agree that the king sets the rules.
They've waived their rights and they've
Right.
gone to the things. Very interesting.
King's,
I'm gonna try to plug in this device, which will help you all hear the conversation in the room a little better. But actually, I don't have. This isn't going to go in. Okay, I don't have the cables. Okay, so there's So anyway, it's the point of this discussion today, of this example, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, if you turn to page, wait a second, if you turn to the end of the lesson on page 32 and 33. Wait. On page 32 and 33, there is a long passage, there's a long quote from the writings of the Rashba explaining how he came to his conclusion. And the first line there says, Jewish law favors the community's argument in this case. He rules according to the community. He rules like the community, and there's a long passage over there, and I encourage you to read it at home. We don't know. We don't know why. But it's so read the article at the end of the thing, read what the Rashba had to say about this, and you'll get a larger halachic analysis of this. But we're not going to do that right now because we're bringing this example primarily to show the kinds of questions that were asked. In some lessons, we're going to focus on the questions. In some lessons, we're going to focus on the answers. In today's lesson, we're focusing more on the question than the answer. Okay? So but the answer's there at the back of your book, and you can take a look at it at the back of the lesson. The answer's there, and you can analyze it. But I'm not going to spend the whole day analyzing this, because some of them you have to get into very legal nitty-gritties, and that's not the goal for today's class, okay? We're just introducing the kind of questions, and specifically, how these questions can tell you a lot about history, right? The historical context of the community that was asked this, that asked this question, and the people in this. Okay, let's one more question, and then if it's a then hold your then write down your question. We're going to take one question from Josh, and then we're going to, if anyone else has a question, please you'll ask it a little bit later, just because I got to keep it moving. Okay.
When they ask the question that they will accept.
I don't know. We'll see. Let's see. Let's see. It's a good question. What do you think?
Yeah, I think otherwise the whole thing is.
So it's a very interesting question. Probably depends who's asking the question, right? But it depends who's asking the question. So this question was probably asked by the community. I don't know. We don't, if they both, so if they both jointly asked the question, then they would, if they would both jointly ask the question, so then they would probably abide by the ruling. It's possible one side went and got the Rashba involved and then brought it to the other side, and then do they accept it or not? Depends on the people, depends on the context, depends on what's happening, right? It all depends. Everything, it's we don't know. We have to examine it.
It's not like a judge.
It could be, but it's not necessarily. It could be, but it's not necessarily. This is more, you understand?
So response in general could be legally binding according to Jewish law or any law? I mean, I assume it wouldn't.
It's not a court case. It's very important. It's not a court case. It's not a court case. It's not a court case.
It's like if you ask the rabbi, that's what I assume.
It could be two people asking the rabbi together. They're not, it's not a court case. It's an important question. It's not a court case.
Shocked that they were badges. I got the Nazis were the first one. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you know, distinctive clothing and badges predated by the Nazis by at least 700-800 years, as we see from the story. It was very common in Europe, in different places, that Jews had to wear distinctive clothing. Distinctive Jewish clothing and marks were very much part of European and Arab, by the way, would do the same thing to Jews as well. Jews were made to wear distinctive clothing.
In the picture on this page, you can see that hat that Jews had to wear.
Yeah, there's the famous that's a famous thing as well. Yeah, if you look at the, okay. Now, page 5 in our books has a chart of genres of Torah literature. And I'm not going to go through this in great detail today, but just to point out that we all know about scripture, and we know about the Talmud, we know about the Midrash and Kabbalah and Halakha. And the next one is called She'elot Utshuvot, which means responsa literature. And the point being that it is a very important part of Judaic writing. Dov Ber and I have been reading when I went in December, or late November, I think it was, into the Chabad conference, the annual conference. I met a rabbi there who writes responsa in English, actually. He, on many, is a modern day rabbi, lives in Tzfat in Israel, and people email him questions on all kinds of typical, very much usually about Jewish rituals. And he is, I think his name is Rabbi Goldstein is his name. And he writes these things, and he has these books in English, and I bought a whole bunch of them he's on the internet a lot and often do it, and I thought it would be nice to support his work. No, nothing, no chief rabbi, some unknown guy in Israel who happened to have written a bunch of books. And it's interesting, all kinds of interesting questions that came up that he sort of written it, and it's responsa literature. It's about Shulchan Aruch Harav or something. I don't remember. Okay. It's an interesting thing. And Dov Ber, it's like interesting reading, right? Dov Ber, people ask him all kinds of interesting questions, and he gives all kinds of answers. And sometimes they're more interesting, sometimes they seem right, and sometimes we wonder if exactly. But he's pretty good, I think. Would you say?
Yeah.
Dov Ber was pretty good, and we've had some interesting conversations based on reading some of these things. This guy writes.
You get to Tzfat because that's where the Mekubalim used to live.
Everything goes back to that, but I don't know his personal story. Okay, so anyway, I'm just telling you that to this day, in fact, later in this class, we're going to have a tshuva from a guy by the name of, a rabbi in Israel, a famous rabbi, Rabbi Wosner, who wrote a set of modern-day halachic writings called the Shevet HaLevi. His book is called Shevet HaLevi. And yesterday on the plane back from Israel, I was sitting by the window. There was a gentleman from near Haifa who's a general contractor who was sitting in the middle. And the guy on the left by the aisle was a grandson of the Shevet HaLevi. So today he teaches 3rd grade in Williamsburg. This young man who's the grandson of the Shevet HaLevi. His brother, he told me, is the Satmar Rav in Monsey. Okay, anyway, the point is that there's this idea of people writing questions and writing answers to difficult dilemmas continues, and it's, to this day, there are people that are writing this kind of literature, and it's very interesting type of literature. What's interesting also that we're going to focus on in this class is how you can glean a lot of historical insight from reading these writings. So page 6, text 2, unintended historical records. This is an entry from Shlomo Zalman Tal on the entry of response in the Encyclopedia Judaica. Upstairs, I have the Encyclopedia Judaica. It's a famous set of encyclopedia that many people have and read. And so he says like this: a special importance attaches to responsa as a primary source for knowledge of the history of the Jews in the various countries. Responsa literature has one advantage over such other accepted historical sources as chronographies, official documents, biographies, etc., since the evidence it affords is undesigned without any specific historical purpose or intention. Moreover, while in general the accepted sources preserve only important events, the responsa echo the humdrum daily life of the ordinary person, his folk ways, beliefs, dialects, and of particular importance, details about the lives of villagers and townsmen whose identity is completely blurred in the usual sources. Since the beginning of modern Jewish historiography, the responsa literature has been drawn upon for this purpose. Some of you know that there was a gentleman who used to live in Stamford, a close friend of mine, Glenn Diner, who was he's a professor of Polish Jewish history, of Jewish history in Eastern Europe. And
University guy.
yeah, he moved to Virginia Tech, not Virginia Tech, the University of Virginia, where he's heading up the Jewish History Department at the or the Jewish Studies Department at the University of Virginia. And one of the things, the reason he and I spent a lot of time together is as he researched Jewish history in all its different places and times, he would always look to responsa literature about the period to see the topic. And he and I spent a lot of time studying responsa literature together, these kinds of answers from rabbis to see, and his main interest is to come at it from a historical perspective. So I'll give you an example. We were studying an issue of recently, he's now researching anti-Semitism in Poland at different times. And well, it's not such a simple discussion, because what we read about is we read a story about a Jewish merchant who was probably killed by a Polish merchant to steal all his wares. And the Polish merchant was executed by the court. The Polish courts, the Polish people killed and executed a Pole for killing a Jew. This was in the 1700s or 1600s, 17th century, in the 1600s. A Pole was executed by the court for killing a Jew. The question was, the execution was based on circumstantial evidence and a confession. And the halakhic question was whether the Jews, there was no body. They never found the body. So can the Jew's wife remarry? Based on the confession, based on the deathbed, the deathbed confession, right? The day before the day of the execution, the murderer confessed. But the question, is it a legitimate confession or is it a forced confession? So, so this was the question that was brought to the rabbi. But what this tells you historically is it tells you that in the 17th century in Poland, a Pole could not get away with just murdering a Jew. Who knew that a Pole could get executed for killing a Jew? Because the gentry was protected the Jews, because Jews were playing a very important role as tradesmen. So that becomes a whole historical discussion that you can glean from this kind of literature.
And also goes back to economics.
And economics is a huge part of it. Economics is a huge part of it. Always is. Okay, so so far what we've done in today's class is we've introduced the concept of responsa. We've introduced the concept of responsa, and we have we've spoken about how responsa can give us a great insight into history, right? Any questions or comments now, ladies and gentlemen?
What are doing now in Virginia?
I don't know. He's eating breakfast, I hope. I don't know. He's a professor there. He's the professor there now in Virginia, University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Any other questions or comments? Anyone at home have any questions or comments?
Is this the guy who was an expert in Polish Jewish
Yes.
taverns?
Yes, that's the guy.
Experts in Paul.
Okay, we're not going to discuss guys, the class is not about Glenn Diner. The class is not about that.
It's just that families.
Okay, I know, and they should never do that, and I'm angry with them too. Okay, so the question was, are Reuven and Shimon obligated to contribute to the community's expenses? There was a tax dispute, and we looked at what the Rashba had to say about that, and we said, and we've spoken now about the concept of she'elot utshuvot, also known as shutz, the written response to halakhic questions. Approximately 650,000 halakhic questions and answers exist today. In other words, there are about 600 collections from major rabbis of shailas and shuvas. Each one of them has about 1,000, has a 1,000, or maybe there's 1,000 with 600 or 60,000. I don't know exactly, but they came up with that number. There's a lot of it out there. So to research it, and obviously the more, some of them are more, like all writings, some of them are considered more weighty. Some of them are considered more weighty and important, like the Rashba is one of the most important sources. And some of them are considered have less gravitas.
Says who?
Says the consensus of readers. In other words, so and like all literature, the ones that people read, you know what I mean? Some survive the test of time and some don't. That's the way things work. Some survive. The greatest test on the weight of their opinions is how they survive the test of time. Okay, there's a glimpse, and this response to literature, and it's now here comes something we can do. It gives us a glimpse into the crafting of Jewish law. It gives us a glimpse into Jewish history, and it shows us Judaism in action, revealing Torah as the heartbeat of everyday life. So if you look at pages 8 and 9, and 10 and 11, these are some of the questions. We're gonna be looking at 30 major questions from all these different places on pages 8 and 9. And pages 10 and 11, there's going to be secondary questions that come up, which we're not going to look up in as much detail. Now, this is originally designed as a 6-week course because we get to Pesach in 6 weeks. 6 weeks from today, 6 weeks from tonight, I think, is the first Seder or something.
Purim does.
So because of that, we're not going to be able, we're gonna condense 6 classes into 5 sessions. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in our class.
Purim is
Purim doesn't fall out on a Wednesday, so it's not Purim is Monday night, Tuesday. It's this coming Monday night and Tuesday, and everybody's invited to join us here on Monday night for a Megillah reading and on Tuesday night for a Purim party. And since I'm talking about Purim also, we are looking for a few more people to help sponsor the community Mishloach Manot. Thank you to those who have already done so. Anybody who would like to participate in that project, please let me know. There's also an email that went out, maybe more than one email went out. And if anyone can help us with that, we greatly appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to, lesson 1 today focuses mainly, we're going to look at today mainly at the people asking the questions and see the devotion of the people that ask the questions. Lesson 2 is Torah in the trenches. Lesson 3, precedent and practice, counterweights, 5th factor, and forging forward. Okay. Well, that's a question.
Yeah.
Yes, he must have asked. That's great, I love that.
Okay, so let's look at page 12. Page 12. Page 12. So it says a theological framework. It says a theological framework. And this is the idea, and we'll then unpack it. It says over here, 4 theological principles converged to form the response to literature. If you have to backtrack and think, okay, philosophically, what is the culture of people? What are the beliefs of the people that ask and answer these questions? So there are 4 underlying philosophical beliefs that these people have. The first is a longing for a relationship with God. They believe that humans, because there's a lot of religion involved in this. So the people who ask these questions believe and long for a relationship with God. They recognize that this connection is made possible through mitzvahs. The belief that mitzvahs must be fulfilled with precision. There's a lot of nitty-gritty that happens in halachic responses. So the people that do this believe that every mitzvah that they do has deep spiritual value, and the way it's done is very important. And the instructions that in moments of doubt or ambiguity, one is to seek halachic clarity from those steeped in Torah wisdom. They also believe that you shouldn't make up the answers yourself, and you should go to experts to try to get the answer. So let's try to analyze the basis of these philosophical principles. So the first is this idea that human beings have a relationship with God, and the second that mitzvah provides a connection, that a connection with God is achieved through fulfilling the mitzvahs. And so as an articulation of these beliefs, turn to page 13, where it says, text 3. This is a quote from the writings and the teachings of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who said, the word mitzvah is related to the Aramaic word tzavta, which means connection, togetherness. In Hebrew, one who performs a mitzvah connects with God, the issuer of the commandment. So usually it's very interesting. A lot of people think that the Hebrew word mitzvah, and it does translate as a commandment. It's true that it is a commandment, but it's also milashon savta v'chibur, which means a bonding. A mitzvah is a bond. This is the meaning of the Mishnaic phrase in Avot. The reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah. The reward of the mitzvah is the connection it generates with God who issued the commandments. And there's a very famous teaching, I thought it was here in the book, but it's not, that one of the fascinating things is that if you imagine Einstein, right? He's walking through campus in Princeton University one day, and there's a janitor over there. And the janitor and Einstein have no real relationship. But if Einstein asks the janitor to do him a favor, all of a sudden the two of them have a relationship. Right? So if God, can we connect to God? The answer is, in truth, God is unfathomably beyond human experience. But if God asks us to do something for him, we suddenly become extremely important in God's orbit in a very real kind of a way, in a genuine way. And so the idea is that a mitzvah is not only an opportunity to fulfill God's commandment, but every mitzvah that we do is actually a connection point between us and God. We connect with God through the mitzvahs. And therefore, the people that ask these kinds of questions, who yearn for a spiritual connection with God, take mitzvahs very seriously because they want to fulfill the will of God, because they want to have a relationship with God. Okay. That's about the relationship and the mitzvahs. As for the importance, the specifics, each mitzvah involves a specific action performed by a specific person at a specific time in a specific manner. If your beloved asks you to do something, if your beloved asks you to take out the garbage, and you say, I'm going to buy you some chocolates instead, it's not going to help the relationship.
Why not? Not me.
Oh, it won't help the relationship.
Take the garbage out without having to be asked.
And by that's true. That's true. That's true. In other words, if you're asked to do something, I'll tell you why it's so important. I'll tell you why. I'm going to talk deeper now. The reason why this is so important is one of the most important things in a relationship is about getting out of yourself and connecting to the other where they are at. It's like one of the rabbis on this trip that I went on. So some of the people were talking about gifts they were bringing home for their wives. And one of the guys talked about the time that he brought home a Talmudic book for his wife as a gift and how that was not appreciated. She had no interest in the book that he was interested in. He thought he would give it to his wife as a gift. You know what I mean? That's not a whole point of a gift is you try to go into the other person's space. So when someone asks you to do something, it's because they want it done a certain way. And even if you don't necessarily appreciate why they want it, in fact, not only does that, that itself is the whole value of doing it, because they know you did it just for them. So when Hashem asks us to do things that we don't necessarily understand, when God asks us to do things for him that we don't understand, and we do it, it shows a devotion that's bigger than our own understanding. Now, that doesn't mean we can't do extra things that are important to us as well. And it doesn't mean it will never be meaningful for us. But there's a humility involved in this that is at the core of every mitzvah. And therefore, the details of how we were asked to do it become very, very important. And that requires a humility, which we will see being demonstrated in the kinds of questions that were asked. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, a fourth idea is that when you don't know what to do, seek guidance from a Torah authority. And that has a biblical source. If you look at page 14 in our books, text 4, it says in Deuteronomy, if a matter eludes you in a case involving capital punishment, litigation, leprous marks, or a case where there is a dispute in your cities, you shall set out and go up to the place that God shall choose. You shall come to the Levitical priests and to the judges who will be in those days, and you shall inquire, and they will tell you the words of judgment. You shall do according to the words they tell you. from the place God will choose, and you shall carefully do according to all they instruct you. So we see from this very important value in Judaism of doing things, of connecting to God through his mitzvahs with all its details. And when you're not sure how to do it, to seek guidance from people that are experts in the matter. And that's the basis of all the questions and the answers in responsa literature.
It's smart, everything else is very motivation, but leper smarts in particular, it's only like really specific. You just, I don't know, I'm just curious.
So when in doubt, we seek guidance from a Torah authority. Starting from Moses, Jews have been turning to rabbinic authorities with practical questions for all the centuries of Judaism. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to turn to page 17 in our books. Well, first page 16 also has a map. Can you see the map in page 16? You see the Alboran Sea. In the south, you see Algeria. To the west of Algeria is Morocco, right? And to the northwest is Spain, northwest of Algeria. And Egypt's not in this map. Egypt would be to the east, to your right. So Spain was battling to try to conquer Algeria in the 1700s. So this, we're now going to read a shut, a sha'ila u'tshuva, a question and an answer that was recorded by Rabbi Yehuda Ayash, an Algerian rabbi. I'll tell you an interesting story. Michal's grandfather always marveled throughout his life about an experience that he had during the Second World War. He was stationed in Algeria, and he received a letter from home that his father had passed away. So he wanted to go, you can imagine, a soldier out in the, right, in Algeria, getting news that his father has died. So he wanted to go to shul and say Kaddish for his father. And he didn't know, he happened to be in some town in Algeria, and he was walking down the street just after receiving it. I don't think he even wanted, but he saw a synagogue. He bumped into a synagogue in Algeria, and he walked in, and he saw they were gathered, and they didn't speak one word of English. And he didn't speak one word of French. But suddenly he didn't speak Hebrew either. And suddenly he heard them saying Kaddish. And he was able to take a book, he could read Hebrew, and he was able to say the Kaddish. And this experience of being a Jew from New Jersey, stuck in Algeria, but able to connect with the Jews there over the prayer of the Kaddish, was a very moving experience that he spoke about for the rest of his life. So this is a community in Algeria in the 1700s. And if you look, the person whose writings we're going to read from is not is a less famous than the Rashba we read about previously. He was a Rabbi Yehuda Ayash, a halachic authority, a native of Algeria. And we see over here also a very important thing is the deep scholarship that was happening in these North African Jewish communities in the 1700s. We often think about Judaism as an Eastern European thing. These are great scholars in North Africa, Sfaradim. A native of Algeria, Rabbi Yehuda Ayash served as the chief rabbi of Algiers in the first half of the 18th century. In 1756, he moved to Jerusalem, where he headed a yeshiva until his passing. For those who think that Jews only arrived there after the Holocaust, you can look at that. He is best known for his books, his works, Mata Yehuda and Shevet Yehuda, his commentaries on the Code of Jewish Law, and for his collection of halachic responses titled Beit Yehuda. Okay, so this is what he writes. It's very interesting. He says in the year 5492 from creation, that means 1732, there was great turmoil due to dire rumors. Many claimed that the King of Spain planned to wage war against our city, Algiers, with a vast army and overwhelming force equipped with countless deadly weapons. Because of this, the members of our community sadly suffered tremendous financial losses, having to rent fields and orchards outside the city to safeguard their property and lives. They knew the war was coming and they fled to the countryside to get away from the battlefront, similar to what's happening with Jewish communities in Ukraine today. In other words, they're not involved in the war, but they're the citizens that are the casualties of war. Additionally, they incurred expenses on horses and carriages to transport themselves back and forth. Amid this upheaval, so it's crazy times, refugees, people moving, preparing for war, crazy times. So what do people think about at times like this? Survival, security, economics. Let's see what these people were thinking about. Amid this upheaval, some individuals came to inquire whether it was permissible to pray in the bathhouses located in the fields. They've got a big dilemma. Can we pray in a bathhouse? Generally speaking, one's not allowed to pray in a bathhouse because a bathhouse is like a bathroom. It's not an honorable place. It's not an honorable place. And a prayer can only be said in honorable places. But due to the great demand, even horse stables and bathhouses have been rented out for lodging. Tells you what people were living in. Can you imagine the conditions of people that are renting out bathhouses to live in, and stables with 2 or 3 families sharing a single room? Their question was as follows: do we say that since the bathhouse has been washed and replastered, and no bathing occurs there during their stay, because they've been turned into dwellings, that it is an equivalent to an ordinary clean house? Or do we say that once a bathhouse is rejected for prayer, it forever remains disqualified?
Then they could have a shot.
Which would mean it would be a question on how you make Kiddush on Shabbos. It would be all kinds of dynamics, daily prayers, things like this. There's a lot of prayers that couldn't be said there. You might have to, right? It's a huge inconvenience if you can't pray in your home. You know, what do? Do you have to go start finding other locations or make prayers in the fields? And, right? That's a very good question also. Can you eat there? So the question specifically that we know was asked is, can you pray in these places? Now, I'll tell you already the answer he gave. It's fine. You can read it yourselves at the back of the lesson. It's there. The answer he gave was that you cannot pray there. As much as inconvenience all this, he gave the answer that they cannot.
So what did he give them as an offer?
I don't know. Read it at the back there. But that's not the question we're exploring today. The question we want to explore today is, what does the question reveal about the mindset of the people who posed it? What kinds of people ask these kinds of questions?
Did you ask that question at that time?
I don't know. Why are they, tell me about these people. Are they concerned?
They're more concerned about their
The war.
dialogue and connect.
It seems like one thing, right, their relationship with God and their dialogue with God as expressed in prayer is heck of important to them. These are very devout people, right? These are people with great faith, and they care about the details, right? Because they don't just say, oh, well, you can just pray wherever you want. They want to do it right. They're humble. They're asking the rabbi. They're not making it up themselves. They have a genuine dilemma, and they're not as even though they're going through very difficult circumstances, their spirituality is one of their greatest concerns. That's what they're worrying about.
Oh, that's disturbing to me. I mean, two people are in such a difficult, I mean, how could that not be, that's very disturbing to me.
Okay,
How could people pray in Beit HaMikdash after the Greeks desecrated it?
it's a good question. Okay, we're gonna, if we're gonna, so if we look at the end, It's not we're focusing now on the kinds of people that ask these questions. And we're focusing now. I'll tell you a similar story. The Rebbe once was having a farbrengen, a gathering where he was talking to a group, to all the Hasidim in 770. And he told a story, and he started crying when he told the story. It was, I think, in the 60s. He had received a letter from a teenage boy in Russia, actually in the Soviet Union, who wrote a letter to the Rebbe. He was a 16-year-old teenage boy. And he had managed to smuggle out a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So what do you think a 16-year-old, he smuggled out of Russia, because Russia, you couldn't communicate with the rest of the world. He had managed to get a letter out of Russia to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the question he asked the Rebbe said, I got a letter from this boy. And the Rebbe started to cry. He says, what do you think the 16-year-old kid in Russia was worried about? His letter to the Rebbe was, what should I do? I have a hard time focusing with devotion in my prayers without getting distracted. And the Rebbe was crying to say, here's a kid stuck behind the Iron Curtain, cannot leave, living in absolute poverty, worried about the KGB taking away his parents every day. But what did he ask? He didn't ask for an easier life. He didn't ask for a blessing to be free. His question was, what should I do if I have a hard time praying? Here you've got a Jewish community in Algeria in the most difficult circumstances. And what's troubling them? Can they pray in their temporary dwellings, or do they have to make another plan for where they're going to pray? Now, Rachel, I understand your question. My quick answer would have been, for sure you can pray there. But for whatever reason he goes through it, we'll see. Maybe he says you can pray there. I don't know. It's not really as important today. We'll look at, maybe it did, if it makes you feel better. I don't know. Look at the end. You'll look it up. I'm sure. I did say that he said you can't. But it's not where we're going here. And the next one, this is a very important, interesting, it's an interesting document in time about what that community in Algeria was like in 1731. It gives you an insight into what are the most important Jewish values. Could you imagine having to go live in a bathhouse? But what was troubling them? Not the bath. What was troubling them was, where can they pray? Okay. Jews sought shelter in fields, barns, and bathhouses until the danger was over. The question they asked is it permissible to pray in a bathhouse? Despite displacement, we see from this that despite displacement, Jews remain steadfast in their desire to pray, and to do it not just in general, but to make sure to maintain all the rules of halakha, of Jewish law, as they did their prayers. Which brings us, ladies and gentlemen, to our next story from today's class. We're going back in time now to 1391 in Spain. If you look at page 19, what a lot of people don't know, everybody knows about the expulsion in 1492. Actually, the century that preceded the expulsion was one of the most difficult centuries for Spanish Jewry, in which there were repeated massacres and forced conversions And it became very, very difficult to live as a Jew. And this is a map of massacres and forced conversions in 1391. And you just see how many different cities this was happening. And it was a crazy, crazy world. So in 1391, riots swept across Spain, causing many to convert to Christianity. And the thing is like this, if you were forced to convert to Christianity, okay, now you became a Christian, they left you alone. Except if you went back, if a Christian went back to Judaism, the penalty for that was the death penalty. A Christian who converted to Judaism or went back to Judaism, if a Christian converted to Judaism, the penalty was the death penalty. Leaving Christianity for another religion was considered apostasy, and the penalty was death. So if somebody, if a Jew didn't convert to Christianity, because he remained a Jew, then you could be persecuted, but they weren't killed for it. But a Christian, if once they accepted Christianity, going back to Judaism was punishable by death. So some Jews were forced, and some Jews didn't actually convert. But some Jews did convert or claimed to convert, but then they wanted to go back to being Jews. And they became known as secret Jews or crypto Jews. In popular language, they were called Marranos. Marranos is not a nice word because it means pigs. But they're also known as conversos, Jews who were first to convert and remain secret Jews. So now we have a very interesting story. Rabbi Shlomo Duran, look at page 20 in the middle of the page and the margin. Rabbi Shlomo Duran was the Rashbash. He was a halachic authority. He was born in Algiers. This is 400 years earlier than the last one. Rashbash was the son and successor of Rabbi Shimon ben Tzemach Duran, and like his father, he authored many responsa. In 1437, he composed the defense of the Talmud, which was published under the title Mechemes Cheva. Additionally, Duran also defended Judaism against Christian theological polemics in his treatise Tiras Emunas HaNotzrim. Anyway, he was asked the question by these conversos. Now, interestingly, he's in Algeria. Why do you think he's getting the question in Algeria? The reason is, no Jew in Spain dared ask this question of a rabbi in Spain or even have any contact with Spain. They could send a letter to Algerian relatives and ask them to pass on a question to an Algerian rabbi, because maybe you would avoid the Inquisition. But in Spain, any contact with Jews was a death sentence. And any suspicion of being Jewish or continuing Jewish practice would be a death sentence.
So the Inquisition was torture.
They'll torture them to death. So in Algeria, the rabbi is fielding questions from conversos in Spain. And this is what he writes. I was asked about those conversos whose hearts are directed towards heaven and who strive to observe the mitzvahs to the best of their ability. How can they eat during Passover in a way that avoids violating the severe prohibition of chametz? You got Passover, they got 8 days. They probably won't get matzah, because if they're caught with matzah, it's a death penalty. But what are they going to eat? They can't eat chametz either. So, and they've got to make sure that there should be no suspicion of eating chametz, of eating bread. For them, refraining from all foods typically avoided by Jews on Passover is not practical. What did Jews in Spain eat on Pesach? They would eat matzah. And the main staple of a Jewish diet on Pesach was, in Spain, was rice. Ashkenazi Jews don't eat rice on Pesach, but Sephardic Jews do eat rice on Pesach. And Pesach, the main thing Jews would eat was rice. So it almost was, not only could they eat rice, that's what they ate. Even if they limit themselves to eating rice and similar foods, They fear being accused by Christians of maintaining their ancestral customs, as rice is commonly prepared in every Spanish Jewish home during Pesach. If they go looking for us, what are they going to eat? This fear weighs heavily on them. Some of these distressed and anguished individuals have asked whether there are grain-based foods that Jews traditionally avoid on Pesach that could be permitted in their unique circumstances. Is there anything they can do with wheat on Pesach that would not be chametz, but that would give them a staple grain without putting suspicion on them that they're secret Jews? They can't eat matzah,
I know.
but can they do anything else?
Well, it's a good question.
It's an important question, and it's a life threat. So the question we're going to ask is, what parallels and distinctions can be drawn between this case and the prayer scenario? What does this tell us about the kinds of people that are? What does this tell you about the conversos? What does this question tell you about the conversos and their relationship to Judaism?
Did it not agree us?
Huh?
About survival.
They're incredibly devout. They're struggling with how to maintain Jewish tradition. They're trying to be as observant as possible. It's fascinating, right? It gives you a sense of these. This is a very devout community that they're even asking this question. Practically speaking, he actually gives them some grain recipes on how you can use grain on Pesach in a way that might be okay. He even gives them, and he also tells them to eat beans and peas, which are things that Sephardic Jews will eat, but not Ashkenazi Jews on Pesach. So he helps them out. But and he tells them what they can't eat as well, what they can't do either. But it's fascinating. These are people that are living under the greatest duress, under the threat of death, but they're trying to find, they're looking for guidance on how to maintain Jewish tradition under the most difficult. These are incredibly brave, powerful, faithful Jews. Even though they're conversos, even though they were forced, they accepted Christianity. They didn't, when given the test, they didn't choose death over becoming Christians. They accepted to become, but they still remain. So these are very tortured people. I mean, you can see that over here.
Say that Ashkenazi Sephardic customs came out of those dilemmas. It's already.
I think, look, this is more about the Sephardic community. The Ashkenazi prohibition of eating grain on Pesach, not grain, of eating legumes, developed for different reasons. But I can tell you something, that to this day, Sephardim carry with them a sense of pride for having withstood the forced conversions of Spain that helped forge in their culture a generational resilience and strength and faith that Ashkenazim don't have. Their origin story is people that withstood forced conversion. That's a very powerful thing to carry around with them. So culturally, some of the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim might go back to these times. But you see over here very strong, faithful people. So it's interesting what we're seeing is, and then there's this, the channels of communication between Spain and Algeria, and that is how it works. There's a lot of history in this as well. Any questions or comments from the folks at home? Okay.
What was the background of this?
Christian extremism.
Was it after they conquered the sand from the Muslims?
It's quite a bit after. I'm not sure exactly when. We have to look it up. I remember I've studied this, but okay. We're now going to look at a story from the Holocaust. Again, the central theme of today's class is the faith and courage of the people that are asking questions. Now, I'm going to give a little bit more, go a little deeper before we read this. There's a growing tendency in Holocaust studies to recognize the strength of the victims of the Holocaust. That there was tremendous spiritual resistance that was happening in the greatest and most horrific of times. Maintaining humanity, maintaining inner strength at a time when the enemy is trying to dehumanize people shows a deep, deep, deep form of resistance, a spiritual resistance that is more and more being recognized for the incredible strength that it was. Physically, entire armies fell to the Nazis, right? France and England, well, England resisted, but France and Belgium and Czechoslovakia and Austria and wherever else it was, fell in a moment. So it's no wonder that the shtetl fell too. But what's incredible is the heroism and the inner strength of some of the people at those times. And the following story reflects that. This was written after the war by a survivor, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Meisels, who wrote an incredible book called Sheilot u'Tshuvot, Questions and Answers, Mekadshei Hashem, from those who sanctified God's name during the Holocaust. The biography of Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Meisels is on the right over here, where it says he was there were many Tzvi Hirsches. He was the Weizsäcker Rav. He served as a rabbi in Vak, which is Weizen, in Hungary before the Holocaust. He's best known as the author of Mekadshei Hashem, a collection of halachic responsa from various rabbis killed during the Holocaust. During the war, he and his entire community were sent to Auschwitz. There he served as a spiritual mentor to thousands. He was a rabbi in Auschwitz, if you can imagine such a thing. And he says, I was approached by a Hungarian Jew who said the following. This is in Auschwitz. Rabbi, my only son, more precious than the pupil of my eye, is there among those condemned to the crematorium. The story is like this. This is in the late it must be 1944 because it's Hungarian Jews. So it's just before the liberation of Auschwitz. And one of the things that happened is we all know about the famous selection that would happen when they arrived in the camps, and children were taken to be gassed immediately. But somehow some children would get through. And now they decided they're going to round up all the children. So this person's son, who might be 14 years old, was rounded up to be taken to the gas chambers. The way it worked, though, is they would use the capos. The Germans would use the capos. The capos were the Jewish officers of the Jewish community who were collaborators. And they asked the capos to round up 1,000 children. And the capos had around, the Jewish policemen had rounded up 1,000 Jewish children to hand them over to the Nazis. I don't know if the number was 1,000, whatever the number was. And these capos could be bribed. I have the means to ransom my son. But since we know that the capos will take another in his place, I ask the rabbi to rule per the Torah whether I may ransom him. If I ransom my son, means another Jewish kid will be killed instead of my son. And is that morally right or not? Whatever your ruling is, I will obey it. When I heard this, I shuddered at the thought of ruling in such a matter of life and death. I said, my beloved child, how can I determine the answer in such a grave matter under these conditions? Here I am in Auschwitz, without any halachic books, with no other rabbis with whom to consult, and without the necessary clarity of mind because of the dreadful circumstances.
So we never gave him a ruling? Or
So let me ask you, if you were the rabbi and you were asked this question, would you say he could ransom his son or not?
Yes, the rule is that the first serve the serve.
So Josh says yes, because he says the rule is you first save yourself, says Josh. Who says so? Even if it means killing. Do we kill others to save ourselves? But it would mean somebody else would be killed in his place.
But it's the same thing with the water. Yes.
Is it the same? Elaine says it's not the same. Why is it not the same?
the only way I can imagine that, well, it being rationalized is that, let's say he does ransom his son and saves his son, and then by some miracle, no other kids, something happens in the interim that they're liberated, before a killing of another child happens. That's the only way I can imagine giving any type of answer whatsoever. If that kind of thinking, I don't know if that would be, valid in any sense.
That was the other, this is element. What is, I don't think this is nobody was between, so that's.
Yeah.
No, but more time would have elapsed after he rans. I'm just thinking in terms of time, like maybe something would happen in the interim. I don't know. It could work both.
So what did the rabbi answer him? What did the rabbi answer him? What did the rabbi answer him? So far in the story, what did the rabbi answer him? Shh. So far, what did the rabbi answer? Said, I can't answer your question. The rabbi doesn't want to answer the question. Let's keep reading page 26. He says, I can't answer your question. I'm going to skip, because later he writes, he deals with some of the ethical stuff on page 24, but I'm going to skip and come back. So I said, I can't answer you. However, the man, overcome with tears, continued begging me and said, Rabbi, you must give me a definite answer, as this is a pressing question, while there is still time to save my only son's life. And I was pleading with him, my dear and beloved Jew, please, I beg you, desist from asking me this question. I cannot give you any answers without consulting sources, especially under these terrible circumstances. If the rabbi doesn't say it's okay, what's he learning from the rabbi? Why doesn't the rabbi say you could do it? Because the rabbi obviously thinks maybe he shouldn't. The father responded, Rabbi, This means that you cannot permit me to ransom my only son. So be it. I accept this judgment in love. I continued to implore the man, and I protested his conclusion. Beloved Jew, I did not say that you cannot ransom your child. I cannot rule either way. Do what you wish as though you had never asked me. If you go back a page, the rabbi explains why he had a question. He says, had the practice of the wicked capos been to release the redeemed individual first, and only then to take another in their place, there might have been some basis to permit the deal. After all, the capos themselves are Jews, and according to halacha, it is certainly forbidden for them to actively place another person who was not originally selected into mortal damage, into mortal danger. According to the Torah, one must choose death rather than violate the prohibition of being an accomplice to murder. Therefore, one could have argued that it's not certain that they would replace the redeemed person with another, as they might, at the last moment, be stirred by their Jewish conscience to not commit such a grave sin. This is what Rachel was saying. However, to my great sorrow, I learned that the capo's practice was to first take another youngster from the camp and only afterwards release the redeemed individual. This ensured that they would not lack the requisite number of individuals demanded by the SS, for which the capos were held accountable. So he's saying, I can't give him permission to redeem his son, but he didn't want to tell him no either. But the guy understood that if the rabbi is not saying yes, it means he thinks no. So the father responded, back to page 27, the second paragraph. The father responded, Rabbi, this means that you cannot permit me to ransom my only son. So be it. I accept this judgment in love. I continued to implore the man, and I protested his conclusion. Beloved Jew, I did not say that you could not ransom your child. I cannot rule either way. Do what you wish as though you had never asked me. He continued to urge that I give him a clear answer. But seeing that I was not about to render a halachic ruling, he said with much emotion, Rabbi, I have done what the Torah has obligated me to do. I have asked a question of a rabbi. There is no other rabbi here. If you cannot tell me that I may ransom my child, it is a sign that in your mind you are not certain that halacha permits it. For if you were certain that it's permitted, you would unquestionably have told me so. Your evasion is tantamount to a clear decision that I am forbidden to do so by halacha. All my attempts to persuade him to not place this responsibility on me and to act as though I had never heard the question were completely in vain. How much time do we have here? Can I get another 10 minutes? Because we're not traveling today, everybody.
Sure.
Yes.
Get another 10 minutes.
I just want to say about the story. There was another rabbi in one of the camps, Rabbi Shapira, the Bluzheva Rebbe. He said he was once lighting Hanukkah candles on Hanukkah in the camps. And just before he said the third blessing, Shechianu v'kiyimanu v'giyanu l'zman hazeh, he says, I stopped for a second thinking to myself, can I really say this blessing in Auschwitz? This is a blessing we always say with great joy that God has brought us to this time and moment. Can I say such a blessing in such a place? He says, I turned around to look for the other rabbis and I saw 200 people looking at me, waiting. What was I doing? So when I realized that there were 200 people with enough moral strength and character to be standing over there, praying with me in Auschwitz, I said, what a blessing to be here with such people. What courage. Look at this person over here. His son is going this. The Nazis claim to be the Übermenschen, the superior race. And this Jew, can you imagine a more refined person than someone who's willing to live with his ideals, even at right? In such a hell, the lack of, they try to dehumanize us and look at the humanity in the story. It's really unbelievable. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do one more story. This story, I'm going to skip just a few slides. This is what we spoke about before. The issues over here, by the way, is the Talmud says, if enemies of the Jews come to you, if an enemy comes to you and says, kill someone or I'll kill you, the Talmud says you're not allowed to kill the other person. Because what makes you think that your blood is redder than theirs?
In other words, if someone says to me, kill someone or I'll kill you,
You should rather be
I'll
killed.
say, do it, kill me.
That's what the halacha is. So here is, can I save my child if it means someone else will be killed? The answer is, you can't. So he says, if you save your child and then maybe they'll kill, there's room. But if they're going to take the other person first, you couldn't find room to permit it. All this is, by the way, there's more at the end of the lesson. In the text, you'll see it's worth going through the extra text in the end. Okay. The background for the next section, ladies and gentlemen, is the law of Yibum. Yibum, levirate marriage. Jewish law says a man is not allowed to marry a woman, a man is not allowed to marry his brother's wife. And a woman is not allowed to marry her brother's husband. In other words, even if they get divorced, or even if they die, a brother-in-law is forbidden to a sister-in-law. Except if the brother dies childless, it's a mitzvah to marry his wife. Okay? That's the background. And it's not done today. Today, it's not done. It used to be done, but it's not done anymore. Now, can you hear this at home?
Yep.
You hear the sound? The sound was working?
Yes, yes.
Oh,
I'm going to
no.
watch today's lesson video.
This is the surprising tale of a political and religious upheaval that sent shockwaves across Europe in the 16th century, a saga that led to England breaking away from the Catholic Church. It is the story of King Henry VIII of England and his infamous Great Matter. In 1530, King Henry sought to annul his marriage to his queen, Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. Catherine had failed to give birth to a male heir, and Henry's heart had strayed toward another woman, Anne Boleyn. Catholicism does not allow for divorce, but it permits marriage annulment, whereby the Church declares that a marriage was not valid to begin with. For a king, however, an annulment had to be sanctioned by none other than the Pope. And that is where Henry ran into a brick wall. Pope Clement VII refused to provide a marriage annulment. Why was the Pope opposed to the annulment? The answer lies in the towering figure of another European king, Charles V, known as the Holy Roman Emperor. Just 3 years prior, in 1527, Charles captured Rome, effectively turning the Pope into his puppet. Charles had no intention of allowing the Pope to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine because Charles's mother, Joanna, was Catherine's sister. Charles knew that his Aunt Catherine wished to remain Queen of England. Charles therefore used his immense influence over the Pope to create a formidable obstacle for Henry. Henry was undeterred. He and his advisors crafted a strategy that would pressure the Pope to grant the annulment. Their plan was to argue that Henry's marriage to Catherine was immoral and had to be annulled. Their reasoning? Catherine had previously been married to Henry's older brother, Arthur. Back in 1501, Catherine married Arthur, the heir to the English throne. Their marriage was arranged by their parents, creating a powerful alliance between Spain and England. Tragically, Arthur died just months later, and his short-lived marriage to Catherine yielded no offspring. To preserve the alliance, Catherine was subsequently married to Arthur's younger brother Henry in 1509. Their marriage required a special papal dispensation because marrying a deceased brother's widow was rare and controversial in Catholicism. Henry's team now sought to exploit this unorthodox history to pressure the Pope into annulling the king's marriage. They did so by gathering testimonies from various scholars, claiming that marrying a brother's widow was a grave sin. It should not have been allowed to begin with. Curiously, they also hoped to approach Jewish authorities for support. The problem with consulting the Jews was that England had expelled all of its Jewish subjects some 240 years earlier, in King Edward's 1290 Edict of Expulsion. King Henry therefore dispatched a close confidant, Richard Croke, to Italy. His mission, to secure evidence from prominent Jewish scholars that marrying a brother's widow was a grave sin. The challenge with this endeavor lay in the fact that while the Torah forbids a man from marrying his brother's widow, Deuteronomy explicitly carves out an exception. If a man dies childless, it is a mitzvah for his brother to marry the widow to establish a legacy for the deceased. This is called yibum, or levirate marriage. Henry's marriage to Catherine seemed like a straightforward case of permissible yibum. Richard Croke's plan, as revealed by the letters he wrote during his mission in Italy, was to enlist rabbis who would limit the scope of the mitzvah of yibum, making it inapplicable to Henry. For instance, he sought rabbis who would rule that yibum was only a mitzvah if the husband died during the betrothal, but that yibum was forbidden if the husband died after consummating his marriage. He also sought rabbis who would testify that yibum was only permissible for Jews, but not for non-Jews. Ultimately, Henry's research project was in vain. The Pope wasn't about to change his mind. Seeing that he was unsuccessful in securing an annulment from the Vatican, he chose to break away from the Catholic Church and to establish the Church of England. On May 23, 1533, Henry's newly appointed archbishop annulled his marriage to Catherine, and Henry crowned Anne Boleyn as his new queen. For the Jewish people, this historical episode marked a rare moment in which a Gentile monarch sought guidance from Jewish wisdom.
Anyway,
That a good,
yeah,
that one.
the rabbi that was consulted was Rabbi Yaakov Payanu, however it's pronounced, page 29 in our books, who wrote a tshuva, and he wrote one of these responses. He said, a distinguished priest named Senor Francisco Cortizo asked me to express my opinion and resolve his doubt regarding the prohibition in Leviticus forbidding one from marrying his brother's wife. Now, if you look at the bottom left, this is it. This is the text. It's the handwritten response of Rabbi Yaakov Raphael Pianu, connection with King Henry VIII's Great Matter, Italy, 1530. And this document is found in the British Library in London. So when you look at it, it's fascinating. You go to the British Library and you see a rabbi that was consulted. Now, in this case, what's fascinating is the rabbi said the laws of Yibum should apply. And the answer was not what the king wanted. So I guess he didn't use it in his petition. But all the other cases, we've had these very observant, observant's the wrong word, very devout people turning to rabbinic guidance out of faith. Here you got a monarch who's looking for an answer that will help him, and a rabbi that refuses to give it.
What I should have told him, first convert to Judaism,
Yeah.
then I'll give you this.
So does Yibum apply to non-Jews? The king sought to weaponize Jewish law to serve his own agenda. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion for today's class, light in the darkness, what we've seen today, that questions at the most difficult times demonstrate unshakable faith. Can we hold fast to our Judaism? Are we seeking external guidance? Are we looking for real matters? These are some of the things that we have to ask ourselves.
Lesson 1.
Summary of
The
today's class.
practice of devotion. 1. The Torah library encompasses an array of genres, each with its own rhythm and character. Among them, She'ilot Uteshuvat, responsa, stands as a distinct and treasured category of halachic case law, offering vital insights into the deliberative process of rabbinic rulings. 2. Beyond its legal significance, responsa literature serves as a vital lens into Jewish history. Notably, it illuminates how the Torah was the lifeblood of Jewish communities across diverse eras and settings. 3. The emergence of responsa literature was driven by the deeply rooted Jewish desire to forge a relationship with God through meticulous mitzvah observance and the Torah's directive to seek halachic guidance in times of uncertainty. 4. A question from 18th century Algiers demonstrates the unwavering resolve of Jews to maintain the sanctity of prayer, according to halacha, even in the face of adversity. 5. A 15th century inquiry regarding Passover foods reveals the courage of crypto-Jews who sought rabbinic guidance despite the immense risks, even when complete observance was not feasible. 6. A heart-wrenching question posed by a father during the Holocaust epitomizes a profound commitment to moral clarity, even amid the abyss of rampant brutality. 7. In stark contrast, a responsum tied to King Henry VIII's Great Matter showcases a misuse of halacha, where its teachings were weaponized for self-serving purposes, sharply diverging from the attitude apparent in the other cases. 8. The extraordinary stories in the responsa literature challenge us to pause and re-examine our level of commitment, precision, and sacrifice for our value system.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions or comments before we call it a day?
So King Henry basically
I think the rabbi's frozen, at least on my screen. Huh?
Yeah, me too.
I guess class is over.
Okay.
That's
Oh, there we go.
Any other questions?
Your video's frozen, Rabbi.
Rabbi, can you repeat the question and answer, or the question we couldn't hear?
I think we lost them.
I think
Oop, gone. Okay.
Very good. Take care, everyone.